Hi guys, hope everyone's well and welcome back to the education section. So in this video I'm going to touch on how long you should bulk for, the second instalment of the gaining phase mistake series. If you didn't watch the first one, it was on rate of gain, so be sure to check it out as it does tie into this episode. And the reason why duration matters when it comes to your rate or how much you should gain during a gaining phase and carrying out a gaining phase as a whole is it's not just about how much kind of weight you gain, because you can only gain muscle at such a fast rate. So if I just told you gain 20 pounds when you're in a bulk, then 20 pounds gained over a month is going to look very different in comparison to gained over 6 months, if that makes sense, or 9 months. So it's not just about gaining a certain amount of body weight, it is the time you spend doing so. As the time you spend doing so is going to influence how much of that's going to be body fat and how much of that's going to be muscle mass. So yeah, body weight gain isn't the only consideration. We want to be spending an appropriate duration in a gaining phase, and we want to ensure throughout the year we're spending up, or throughout not just a year, but throughout long periods of time, on average, most of the time spent gaining. And too fast a rate of gain will lead to basically some tissue gain, but too much body fat gained in the process. So we want to make sure we're having a duration and a rate of gain pace that's going to be appropriate. And gaining gradually over time is key. Time is your best friend when it comes to training and making progress. Like, the more time you can spend in a surplus, the better. And that's why kind of like a too fast rate of gain, as I touched on in the previous episode, isn't always the best, because it cuts your runway short and it cuts the time you can spend in a surplus short. Like, if we gain twice as fast, we arguably have to spend half as long in a gaining phase, half as long in a position where we're in the best position to build muscle before we need to either be at maintenance or diet. So pretty much time plus consistency equates or equals results. So something to consider is how's your bulk to diet ratio. So what I mean by this term is how is the amount of time you're spending bulking in comparison to how long you're spending dieting or at maintenance. We ideally want a ratio where we are spending round about, if possible, 3/4 of our time in a gaining phase or in a calorie surplus. That is an absolute amazing spot to be in. The reason being is that's where we build muscle when we're in a calorie surplus. So that's where we want to spend the majority of our time if our goal is maximum muscle growth. If you spend half your time bulking, then half your time you're also spending in a position where you're not in a great position to build muscle. If you spend, let's say, 3/4 of your time dieting, then most of the time, the majority of the time, you're not in a good position to build muscle. So over the years, this is going to massively influence how much progress you can make. Because if you're never in a great position to build muscle, or rarely, then your progress will reflect that. You want to put yourself in the best position possible to progress, to see progress, of course. So a good example of how long you should spend is, like, every 9 months bulking, you should spend around 3 months dieting. And this is gonna, like, imagine being in a surplus for 9 months on end every single day. You're in such a good position to build muscle. Whereas people who kind of hop from a diet into a gaining phase don't make much progress, in my opinion. They end up looking pretty similar because they don't commit to gradually taking their body weight up in a strategic manner while training hard in the gym. And that's why they don't make much progress. And you often see people look the same because their body weight's just stagnant. Yes, they'll make some progress, but not as much as if they had a purposeful phase they were in, like a dieting phase and a gaining phase, and repeat that process. And there's obviously some exceptions to the ratios, which I'll get to, and also you don't need to spend 9 months bulking and 3 months dieting. What I mean by that is you could spend, let's say, 3 months bulking, 1 month dieting, and repeat that process if that's something you prefer. There's potential pros and cons of each. For example, you might never get your body weight up that high, so you'll never be in a really good position where you're really stable in your pressing movements because your body fat's at a higher level, and you might not be able to maybe progress as best as you possibly can. But saying that, if you want to stay lean and you are willing to maybe take that trade-off, then you could look to diet after every 3 months of gaining, but don't expect to make as much progress as someone who maybe spends 9 months bulking before dieting down. And there's some exceptions where the ratios will be a little skewed. For example, my contest prep next year, I'll be starting pretty early in the year, and I'll be spending over 6 months in a dieting phase. So obviously that ratio is heavily skewed. That's not in a good spot for me to build muscle. And I'm willing to do that, of course. However, this year, 2023, I had to think what year we're in for a second. 2023, I have spent pretty much, when it gets to the end of the year, I would have spent over 9 months bulking. To be exact, I have spent throughout this year, and when this year ends, I would have only spent 11 weeks in a diet, in fact 10 weeks in a dieting phase. Not a long time at all in the grand scheme of things, and the rest of the time bulking. So the rest of the time I've been in prime position to build muscle. And what matters, of course, is yes, the ratios might be skewed here and there. Like next year, the majority of it will be spending dieting actually. Obviously I'm not in the best position to build muscle, but if I expand and look in what's happening in the space of maybe 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, the amount of time I'll be spend in a surplus will be in a good ratio. So it's not just about maybe how much time you're spending in that year or in a month or in half the year. It's about, as a whole, throughout the long term, how much time are you actually spending in a good position to build muscle. So in the long term, we want it to make sure it's in a good spot. And can you gain for too long? I've kind of touched on you don't want to gain too fast. You're just going to build or kind of put on excess body fat. But can you gain for, like, let's say, too long a period? So yes, because if you gain, maybe it could be detrimental if you gain too slow, and also if you ignore signs to pull back. So gaining too slowly can be detrimental, as it can put a cap on how much muscle you can gain. For example, if you put 0.1 kilograms on a week, that will only put you up 5.2 kilograms a year. Yes, you'll stay really lean, but it also means, let's say I finished my contest prep 160 pounds again, then, or well, I'm not really making this easy, because 5.2 kilograms is around about 10 pounds, so that will mean I'm only 170 pounds in that year. And as I touched on earlier, it took me until 175, 180 pounds for me to be in a productive spot to perform. So as you can see here, I'm still not in a good position to perform in the space of a year, because I'm still really light. I'm still really lean. So there I'm limiting my progress massively, and that whole year I'm not in a good spot. I'm not heavy. I'm not in a good heavy position with a decent amount of body fat on my frame to help me push my lifts up, to help me be more stable during my pressing movements, to help maintain a neutral spine during my deadlift variations. So as you can see, I'm just spinning my wheels for that year. So there's times when gaining too slow can be beneficial, and it's limiting how much you can actually build muscle. And the same applies, like, let's say I did only gain 10 pounds, then it would take me 4 years after that contest prep to get to 200 pounds. So you're limiting the amount of time you can spend in a good position to build muscle. So especially at the start, you don't want to be too slow when you're in a gaining phase if you're starting from a lean body composition. And I'd rather see someone gain a wee bit faster than that and then perform a dieting phase and repeat that process. It also prevents you from pushing your lifts up, like I said, from body weight being a driving factor, and it can mean a lack of results, and therefore enjoyment and consistency can both suffer, and obviously your motivation, which ties into enjoyment, of course, and will tie into consistency potentially, depending on if you let it, which you could argue is right or wrong, etc. But you can't lie, it is, you don't want to be not motivated all the time. Motivation is somewhat important, although we shouldn't always rely on it. So yes, you can definitely gain for too long. As I touched on there, you can gain for too long if there's also signs to pull back and you don't listen to those signs, or you don't pick up on those potential red flags to pull back. So if there's maybe any red flags or signs to pull back, it's very important to troubleshoot them first, which I'll get to, and not just think, right, I need to immediately diet afterwards, because gaining phases won't always be super smooth. You'll get interruptions, you'll get obstacles you need to tackle. And you can't just, as soon as you get those obstacles, start dieting, or you're just limiting your progress. So you want to try and troubleshoot them. If you can't troubleshoot them once you've tried, you can then diet, or if you've obviously fixed them, continue to gain. And some signs to pull back could be poor appetite. So if you're really, really, really struggling getting the food in, that can be an option. But again, you can consider, could you play about with food choices, meal timing, meal frequency, walking after meals to help digestion, things like that. And could you consider, like, if your digestion's poor, that can be another sign, but again, play about with food choices before pulling back, and don't just immediately think as soon as digestion's not perfect, you need to diet. You can troubleshoot digestion first. Is your body fat too high? Obviously that's a sign to pull back, because you might be getting to the point where you're not actually benefiting from gaining excess body weight. You're at a point where you're not going to get more leverage and get much more ability to kind of perform better once you gain more body fat. So kind of the positive effects of it just kind of dwindle. You don't really get much benefit. The trade-off's not worth it, getting even higher in terms of your body fat, and it just means you'll have more to take off to get to like a relatively lean spot. And something else to consider is your health markers can be in a poor spot. So things like blood glucose levels being constantly elevated, which you can manage through maybe trying to be more active, your food choices, your overall like sleep quality, supplementation as well. But if your blood glucose is constantly elevated, then that can maybe influence how much actually muscle you can build and how likely you are to store body fat. So you can maybe consider, right, if you can't control that, should you diet down to become more sensitive to carbohydrates? Thank you very much for watching the video. The full video is available for my online coaching clients in the Coach by Charlie education section. If you are interested in online coaching or where else you can find me, please feel free to have a look at the links in the description. And lastly, if you did enjoy the video, any support is greatly appreciated, so drop me a like, comment what you enjoyed about it, and lastly, subscribe for more content from myself.